How are we doing out there, YouTube? My name is Deketa, and thank you for joining me for another StreetzRPG video. It's been far too long since I've done any form of discussion like this on the project, and there have been some pretty big changes in the development process that I thought I should address. So get comfy, maybe grab a beverage, and let's talk about StreetzRPG Classic first. So Classic is the original version of the game, dating back to 2017. I had just picked up 2D game development, and building up StreetzRPG as it is today would rely on a number of archaic and inefficient or just plain underwhelming design choices from that era. The code was messy, under-optimized, and extremely buggy. I quickly realized how under-designed, underdeveloped, and under-functional half the mechanics and features in the game actually were. Now this was all based on my philosophy that a feature should function crudely first, and then later, down the road, be updated to work or look or feel as intended. This was okay for early development, but not version 0.40 and going forward. Over the course of development, I've learned quite a few tricks and tips about handling tables in Lua, and discovered a few methods that make my old scripting philosophies redundant. And since then, I've begun working on a better version of the game, rewriting it from the ground up in order to streamline the engine to allow easier development going forward. NPCs are a perfect example of this. You see, in StreetzRPG Classic, there were only 10 pedestrians, that is, NPCs, that could be distributed throughout the city. This is because for each pedestrian was a table corresponding to it, where all of its data is tracked. Health, armor, if they're armed, where they are in the world, and so on. These tables were all hard-coded, rather being able to be dynamically generated or culled. This made developing missions, adding companions, processing dialogue, an entire headache, since I had to track the specific ID for designated pets. Say, the customer's inside a shop. I'd typically use peds ID 0 and 1, and then 2 for the clerk. It worked, but this was no way ideal. This is just one of dozens of examples of how underwhelming the game was programmed, and it wasn't a viable option to go forward with and adding new content around. As well, a number of systems in place just weren't up to my vision. The inventory is a great example of this one. In Classic, each slot in the inventory was designated for a specific item to be held within it. If you didn't have any of that item, the slot was empty and left useless. I'd much prefer a dynamic inventory where any given slot can hold any given item and they can be switched between slots. This would give a better inventory management aspect, and as well modernize the functionality of the game. Animations too were clunky at best and limited to skins. While skins are still useful for pedestrians, I wanted a more customizable player model. In Reborne, I've implemented this pretty well, so the player is comprised of a series of sprites for their torso, legs, hair, eyes, and head. Not only does this allow for more customization for the player's character, but the sprites can be drawn in any color of the choosing. If you find a certain shirt you like, but want it in green, now it's possible. Where previously, you might have a skin where that shirt is green, but you don't like the hair or skin color it comes with, and you're shit out of luck. There are a number of smaller changes I plan to make as well. The original dialogue system, inspired by San Andreas multiplayer, was a neat reference, but I think it's too niche for the average player to really appreciate. Instead, I hope to implement a more retro-style chatbox system, where the text a pedestrian is saying is generated near their sprite, letter by letter. I'm not sure if there's a certain term for this mechanic, but think more akin to Stardew Valley's dialogue. World building is another critical aspect. If the world doesn't look and feel convincing, you simply don't have an adventure or open world game. I've been experimenting with graffiti, road signs, new buildings, as well as the idea of expanding the city. You really couldn't tell that 2025 Parkwood all started with what it was a few years ago. This will be a lengthy process, as I remove a lot of the older houses mostly, and update them with improved scale and perspective versions, but it will be infinitely worth it. For the first time in almost a decade of occasional development, I've also got reliable building collisioning implemented in Reborne. It's rather annoying to set up manually, since I prefer not to use external libraries, but collisioning is a must-have in any game, even in early access. Now, to step away from discussing what's changing, let's discuss time. Until this new version of the project is enjoyable to play, I will keep it under the wraps so that I can focus on quality, rather rushing to bring it to the market. If I had to estimate, and this is not a promise, I'd guess that StreetzRPG Reborn will be available around summer 2025. I do still plan to submit the project to Steam when it is somewhat assembled and pleasant to play, but that's a $100 expense that I cannot presently afford. So if you or someone you know is interested in the game's development, any donations are always welcome and greatly appreciated. If nothing else, show them this video. The more interest that the project can garner, the brighter of a future it will have. However, like I said long ago, I will likely always develop the game, even if I am its only player. And that pretty much covers what I want to discuss here today. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, don't hesitate to leave them down below or share them on itch or our Discord. Stay tuned for more news, updates, and content drops as I slowly piece the project back together again. There's a lot of potential in this game, in StreetzRPG, and I really want to share it with the world. But, until next time, peace out.